Hey everybody, what's up? This is Ether Force, and we're here. We're here at the very bottom of the rabbit hole with Thomas Joseph Brown and Caleb Thomas, and it just doesn't get any deeper than this. We're going to be talking about stuff today that you're just not going to hear anywhere else. No matter what weird corner of the Star Wars cantina you might find yourself in, you won't hear anyone talking about this stuff except in the deepest whispers. So. Uh, Welcome to the Geocosmos, the cellular cosmogony. Yeah, Tom, could you give us a little history about this? Like, who's the guy that really kind of kicked this off? Cyrus Teed?
Cyrus Teed, well, he was one of them. I think there were some others. But he actually, along with some other people, performed experiments where he published that book, The Cellular Cosmogony, and basically talked about, like, at sea level, if you look at like railroad tracks, the railroad tracks, they come together at about 2 miles. Right, but the curvature of the Earth you can't see it for at least 6 miles. So let's say if you see like a sailboat sailing off into the distance, it really doesn't, you're not seeing it sail over the edge, you're seeing it disappearing into the horizon line, which is an optical effect. So he figured, well, the only way to really check this is to force a mechanical line. They built this big device called the rectilineator, and they forced a mechanical line for 6 miles, and it ran into the Earth. Now it's interesting because basically people have there's a lot of excuses why it wouldn't work and how well it was loose and the thing would have been wasn't designed properly. But yet the interesting thing is if they got an error, the error was perfect for the inverse of what people expected. And I've seen other things on the internet as well. It's been a while since I've really researched this, but I recall seeing somebody posted online, it's probably still there, was a picture of some National Park Service building on a beach in New York that was taken from like 25 miles away on a beach in New Jersey, which if the Earth curves down, that's impossible. And of course, we go, well, God, that's crazy. And it might be, and it makes you wonder why people would think about that stuff, coming from the conventional point of view. But then you look at sort of like some of the top Nazi scientists during the height of the war, and you're thinking, well, German scientists, they're not going to be clowning around, especially during wartime when resources are strained. But they had a base set up on the Baltic island of Rügen where they were basically trying to photograph the British fleet through the troposphere in the North Sea, figuring that the Earth curved. They had some sort of infrared telescope. And apparently they also had ships in the South Atlantic and were trying to get like American shipping lines. So you're thinking, well, we don't know. Maybe the experiments failed. Maybe they didn't. But the fact that they even thought that in the first place, that's what I find interesting. So for me, I don't view it as an absolute. It's more of like it's a belief system that you can consider because there are certain proofs. There's also reasons to think that it's not that way too, which makes it even more interesting.
Absolutely. So, just to backtrack here, you introduced me to this theory of the world, and I had a total meathead reaction to this thing when you first told me. I just didn't want to hear it. I think you remember me resisting, and Caleb, who introduced you to the Geocosmos, and what was your reaction?
Well, the first time I ever heard of it, it was back when I was doing a lot of research into electricity, and I think it was Eric Dollard, and I think it was something that you posted a long time ago with Eric, where he was talking about the sun and the disappearing stars, and that turned me on to. I started researching a little bit more about the research for the disappearing stars, and started reading a little bit about Victor Schauberger and how he talked about how the stars were dark. The sun was a dark, cold body, and as far as the Earth being concave, the whole theory of the concave Earth theory, I didn't actually dive deep until I watched the Disappearing Stars with Tom Brown FireSide chat that you posted up when we were in discussion, and ever since then, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna disprove this. It doesn't make any sense to me. I had the same reaction. I had the same like, no way. There's got to be a way to disprove this, you know. So, yeah. So I went and I started looking at all the different aspects. I looked at the rectilineator, which when I first looked at the rectilineator, I thought there's got to be a way that his measurements were off, or he didn't account for something. But I reviewed it from 3 different sites that talked about it differently, and it's sound as far as I can tell. He did the experiments from each direction. He placed them on different areas and got the same result. It was always traveling upwards. So,
wow.
I've been into resilient science pretty heavy for the last.
Yeah. Before we get into the resilient science, I want to take it back to Tom for a second. Tom,
yeah.
How did you get turned on to the geocosmos / cellular cosmogony? Like,
I don't know. So we swam through so much information. I'd probably. I don't recall. I mean, because early on I was always sort of tracking out information, and even like before my days at Borderlands, I used to get magazines, little fanzines, like the Hollow Hassle. This lady Mary Davis used to put out for a few years, and Rich Toronto did Shavertron, and the only post-deluge source of Shaverania, based on the Shaver mystery, which was all Hollow Earth stuff. So somewhere along that line, I probably heard of it, but I don't recall where. But then when I took over at Borderlands, there was a copy of Koresh's book there, Cyrus Teed, The Cellular Cosmogony. And that's when I really started looking at it and realizing, wow, they actually went and did physical experiments. And, yeah, I can't remember where I came across the stuff on the Nazi experiments, because that would have been back in the early 80s somewhere. So, yeah, you're probably looking at 30 years I've known about it. So heavens knows where I first came up with it.
Yeah, well, you're like the Gandalf of the scene, so you don't know where you've heard anything anymore. There's just so much in your head. So, perfectly understandable. So, just I want to scale it back, like the political ramifications. If this is actually true, what does that mean? Does that mean that every single government on the planet, basically everyone, is lying about the structure of the universe, inverting it completely? I mean, where does that leave us?
Well, it may not be absolute. It may or may not. So I keep an open mind on it. There's still reasons for the standard sort of model in general, with the spatial sort of extension. In fact, you almost can't really consider it purely in a strict logical format. You almost have to view it in a psychedelic format, and that's why, for me, that's one of the worlds of my 4-world theory. So that's the only way I could really put it all together, because there does seem to be factual basis for believing in sort of the heliocentric as well as sort of the anthropocentric sort of world. It's all ultimately some sort of projection or something. I mean, obviously, because theoretically, you go back to the start, there shouldn't be anything here. So if there's nothing here, then we wouldn't have to talk about it. But yet here we are trying to figure this out. So, what in the world really is going on with it all? That we don't know. So, of course, the governments lie. Well, I just came across somebody posted something today on Joe Rogan talking about the moon hoax.
Yeah, that was me.
Going, that
was you.
You posted that, Caleb?
Yeah, that was me, and thanks for showing me that article. That read is amazing. I love that. That you posted.
Oh, that one from the AULIS.com, aulisonline.com.
Yep.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, the point I was going to make was, with Joe Rogan, who's fun to listen to, because he's very sharp and gets to talk to a lot of people. But he's saying, oh, well, the whole reason for it was the Cold War. The Russians had the top technology and all that, but the Americans didn't. You just stop for a second and think of the logic on that. Well, if the Russians had the top technology, then they would have known they couldn't have gone, so they had to know that the U.S. stuff was fake.
Yep.
There's no way in the world that they were going to be fooled. So just that simple logical. You find all these logical errors all through stuff. You go, wait a minute. How come they think that?
So okay, Caleb, the question to you right now: what does that mean if this is actually true? Where does that leave us as human beings in a world full of states? And who's telling? I mean, whoa, it's kind of scary down here on level 7 of the rabbit hole, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're kind of jumping pretty far to like the implications. To me, it's really it actually is making more sense of things. Because I've been down deep in the rabbit hole for a while, learning about all different types of possible conspiracies, and the whole NASA, the how all the different countries of the world that have their space agencies have very similar propaganda, very similar um, logos, like the vector. Have you seen that the vector um, symbol is in all of the space agencies, and you start to see that there's like almost it makes sense to me that there's an all-encompassing force that is trying really hard to suppress information and steer people's research in different ways, and all the controlled opposition that I keep finding, where you'll see all these different groups come out with an alternative viewpoint at similar points, and kind of steer people in, kind of like the whole, different movements. Every time you find like a new age movement or whatever, you kind of start to see that. But as far as the implications, um, I think it's pretty obvious that they've been trying to suppress technology. They've been trying to suppress anything that is really, really worthwhile. It wouldn't surprise me at all that they're suppressing on this scale. A lot of people want to say it's too big of a conspiracy, that there's no way that these groups have this much control. But if you start asking questions like, who built the pyramids and why and how, and you start to dive deep in any of these ancient philosophies, you see like an ongoing conspiracy, an ongoing um,
conspiracy. Absolutely.
a controlling hand.
Exactly, like what you said, an all-encompassing force. So, Tom, you have been around and you've seen all this happening. We're just new to the game. You've seen all this, and what is this all-encompassing force? And all right, before you get to that question, first I just want to say one thing. Tom Brown is the guy that kicked all this off. Anyone you hear now talking about the disappearing stars or optics or light, you don't see light or anything like that, that all came from Tom. Tom is the guy that started this whole thing. Tom is the guy that was calling up NASA in the 80s, right? And you're actually talking with the astronauts themselves. Like, you were on the phone, you called these guys up, right?
Well, naturally. How else are you going to get the answer? Just call them up. People go, you call NASA? I go, yeah, they're in the phone book. Well, I had no idea what I was getting into when I called them. I was studying Goethe's theory of color, and which is basically that color is not contained in light, but is formed where light and dark come together. So the prism manufactures color. It's not contained in light itself, which means that the blue of the sky is not light scattering, but yet it's a lit turbid medium in front of black. So if you want to basically reproduce the experiment, for yellow and blue sky, I needed to know. So I called NASA and asked them what the dominant spectra of the sun was in the optical wavelengths above the atmosphere. That's how it started. I didn't intend to discover, that the problems with seeing stars and other things in space. It just sort of happened.
Wow, that's amazing. Hey, Jameson, can you hear us? He just joined. Jameson Fletcher, you there? All right, he
Might
can't
take,
first.
might take a second to come on. But like Caleb, one of the things you said is like people say, well, there's such a big conspiracy, how could they do it? That's logical fallacy. It doesn't matter. That's just some supposition they put in their head, which has actually been planted to prevent them from conceiving larger scale concepts.
Yeah,
It's like they use the term conspiracy theory to, shut off discursive functions of the mind.
exactly.
Um, so
That's absolutely amazing because like when you talk with this about people, they always bring up relativity, and they always make the same argument over and over again about relativity. And they say, "Oh yeah, but the Earth has to be moving," and then you ask them, "But wait a minute, wouldn't you feel it if it was moving at 3 angles of rotation? Around its axis, around the sun, and then that moving? That's like being in a race car going around a hairpin turn, and the actual race way itself is rotating, and the structure that the raceway is on rotating is also rotating itself, and somehow you're sipping some wine and it doesn't spill." And their argument, oh well, if you grew up on that raceway, you wouldn't feel it, or you wouldn't know it. I mean, it's just an inane argument, but you have super intelligent people actually making this insane fucking argument. It's like, what do you say to that? It's like, you think your perception somehow defies reality? It's like the ultimate solipsism. What do you guys think about that? How do you respond to that?
oh, go ahead, Caleb. What's your answer?
Oh man, yeah, I agree 100%, man. I swear, if I hear one more person tell me relativity disagrees with it, I could spend all day debunking relativity, but these people, they won't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's their baby. They spent most of their lives studying it, and it's not going away for those people. It's a belief system. It's a religion to them. So, but yeah, I mean, I completely agree that it's once you actually look at it, it seems so obvious. But until you look at it, you hear these people tell you, "Oh, you can't feel the Earth spinning because of gravity itself, and as the Earth picks up momentum and centrifugal force, the atmosphere." They give you all these arguments, and you just go, "Okay." Unless you actually look into it and do the calculations yourself, it's not really as obvious, I think. But once somebody says, "Look, stop," get all the theories out of your head that everybody else has told you, and logically answer these questions, I think at that point, everybody, can question and come to more logical conclusions. But the indoctrination is so deep and ingrained, and I don't know if you've looked into. It sounds like Tom's probably done a little bit of research into neurolinguistic programming, or some of the the way that the mind perceives different symbols, and how you can hypnotize the masses. It just becomes so obvious when you look at pop culture and the movies, the movie industry. Like Universal Studios, for example. Every single time you see a movie from Universal Studios, right off the bat, you see a glowing Earth globe suspended in space. And it's been rampant in all the media. Um, you know, it's been there. They've been supplanting it in our subconscious ever since the beginning, and it's
Absolutely.
working.
It has been working great. So, Tom, how do we deal with these relativity people? They bring up just the argument of relativity is so inane. How do we counter that? How do we kind of bring them to their senses? Is it possible? Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
that's a good question.
Yeah.
There's certain truths to relativity, but not overall. It's sort of like a spiritless sort of take. They borrowed some things from it, but yeah, I guess. But the main thing about it is that relativity was basically put out to make sure people didn't understand Tesla. So rather than sort of trying to debunk, aspects of relativity, which is fairly easy to do once you get focused on it,
Tom,
I think it's fair to.
I just want to repeat that what you just said because it's so fucking powerful. You just said that relativity was put out so that people would not understand Tesla. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so nothing can go faster than light. Of course, all they ever know about light is the speed of the wavefront in terrestrial conditions. So, once the wavefront's established, as in like stellar light, that's why sort of I can't say I could prove it, but my view on light is that um, like if we look at sunlight, the sun has two kinds of light coming out of it, in a sense. We see it, the yellow and the blue. They're both part of the sunlight. That's a longitudinal and transverse sort of wave, the blue being the progressive transverse, and yellow appearing as longitudinal. So, if we look at stars, because of their distance, the transverse wave is no longer affecting our atmosphere. So we just get the longitudinal. But the longitudinal, like through Tesla's stuff, is extraluminal. There's no transmission time whatsoever. So that means that the starlight's instantaneous. We're seeing the universe in real time as it occurs. In that sense. So yeah, I mean, you can't even think that way in relativity. You have these like mental binders that prevent you. So no, in fact, I've got good friends that are skeptics, but it's really difficult talking to skeptics. They're some of the most dogmatic, counter-intellectual people that I know, because they run on all these beliefs that have been imprinted into them by the system, from relativity on, and then they don't have that flexibility of consciousness where they're able to actually take somebody else's idea, put it into their mind, and turn it around a few times to see if there's anything valid in there. Which I think that's what probably the folks amongst our circles, we're open to new ideas, even if they sound a bit crazy at the start, because it gives us something to think about. It's mental exercise, and along the way we find some amazing gems of information.
Say that again.
Absolutely. It's just going back to, like, for example, like here's one of the arguments. Like, I just want to go through the arguments that I have with people, or the arguments they bring up. Like when I say, okay, if the Earth is moving and you're going from New York to LA, right? Wouldn't going one way be a lot faster than going the other way if the Earth is actually spinning, right? So if the Earth is spinning from west from west to east, right? Or west to east. If they're spinning from west to east, that means when you go from New York to LA, it should be much faster than going from LA to New York, right? Like literally more than half the time. If the Earth is going 1,000 miles at the equator and less, further up. But I mean, and then they respond with, but because it's gravity, they say. And I asked them, okay, how high do you have to be for that not to happen anymore? And they say, out of the Earth's atmosphere. Like, what do you guys think of that?
Well, right off the bat, if with that same logic, the higher you go up, there would have to be a gradient loss, for the gravity. So the speed would either increase, right? The higher you go, so you would notice it more and more the higher you go. So with that logic, as soon as you leave the atmosphere in a space shuttle, the Earth would just start spinning and you would be still, correct? And you would just see the Earth spin. And you would be completely still. Not only that, but supposedly we're traveling through the solar system, thousands of miles in one direction. So wouldn't you start to leave the Earth, and how wouldn't it be harder to come back into orbit? None of it makes sense to me. And especially the cloud thing. How could clouds go, if the Earth is supposedly spinning from west to east? How can clouds travel from east to west at 15, 20, 30 miles an hour.
They're going in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah, none of it makes sense. And the more you look into it, the time of air flights should be off from when they leave, from different points, or from the same point going to the same point around the Earth, traveling in opposite directions. There should be a time difference, and there's just not.
It's amazing. Like, I mean, where do you start? Like, if I was in Egypt, right, and I was trying to educate this little kid I met on a farm, and I was telling him, yeah, the Earth is moving, and I was describing the whole thing to him, and he's looking up at me, and he's like, he's just listening to me, and all of a sudden, after like a couple of minutes, he just looks up to me and goes, "If it's moving, then why can't I feel it?" And he stomps his foot and says, "You're a liar!" And he runs away, and I was like, "Wait a minute."
If only we all had the open mind of a kid, right?
Yeah, I mean, Tom, it's like, how do you inject some sanity into this equation? I mean, we're looking at it from the opposite view right now, where we're like, wait a minute, but how do we bring up the rest of the world into our sphere of complete and abject weirdness?
Good question. I've been working on that for a few decades.
Yeah.
Or sanity.
Yeah. Well, what I try to do is, I mean, questions like that, they're interesting, and they do require, a fair bit of thought. Looking at physics, there's a lot of different sort of ways to think about it. And of course, when you're dealing at that realm, then you kind of have the standard physics model, which is so imprinted in people's minds that they struggle with it. So I find it difficult, even those, we look at some of those things and go, yeah, how come? And Jerry Vassilatos wrote a brilliant article years ago I published in Borderlands called Eidetic Geocentrism, where he deals specifically with the problem we were just talking about. So what I try to do is I try to show people ideas that sort of blows them away to a point that they can't really question that because they don't have any background in the regular scientific paradigm or scientismic paradigm with which to counter it. So that's what I find. So if I was sort of like in a debate with somebody and I want to basically win the argument fast, I just start throwing stuff at them sort of like this here. Cranege's planetary influences upon plants, cosmological botany. And this is brilliant, right? What this discusses, it kind of shows, it deals with the plant as a living archetypal structure which fluoresces through its interaction with the motions of the universe as they appear from the surface of the Earth. So like the roots archetypally would be sort of the moon, right? The general sort of rounded shape into the Earth, where the stem is generally the sun, the solar side. The lower leaves would be like Mercury working up to like the flower, which would be ruled by Venus. But then you get the complexities of the plant world because of the interactions of like Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn as well into it. And you can actually see the reflections of these patterns in the actual plant structures, and you find that these plants that retain the structures of certain planetary orbits are those that were attributed to them in like herbology, which is sort of like we could say it was some intuitive sort of science from the past. So you look at like that and go, okay, well, so that means that you can't really take a plant from here and take it like over to Mars and expect it to grow the same way because you're not getting the same influences here. And of course we have the moon, which in itself is a big old mystery because we wouldn't be having the biological sort of structures that we have right now without the moon. We really couldn't live without the moon biologically. So places like Mars, they might. I've seen pictures that they actually look like they potentially be like forest-like things on Mars from some of the stuff, and they look more like vegetation from the sea that's grown large, which you could understand because the way that the light ether would work on like water vegetation, it would bring that look. You don't have the complexities of the planets able to sort of work in it. And then you take, again, from the Earth point of view, the what we say, the complex motions of the planets, like Venus making the 5-point star over 8 years. Then you see that signature, like you take an apple and cut it, set down, cut it in half horizontally, and look at it, and you have like a 5-point star there. Papayas, see it in certain flowers. That's the signature of Mercury weaving into the fruits from the old doctrine of signatures. You go, oh yeah, well, that's just coincidence, and you're just making attachments. So then you carry on. You go, well, look at like the metal crystallization experiments of Lily Kalisko, where she would take like gold in the sun and silver in the moon and show that the crystallization properties of gold, which is attributed to the sun in ancient alchemy, and silver, which is attributed to the moon in alchemy, and you find out that they actually have crystallization properties directly related to the orbital velocities and directions of the planets as they appear from Earth. Now that one really gets them, because people go, well, it's gravity, or I go, yeah, how's gravity going to connect gold and the sun alone? To the point where during a solar eclipse, when the moon's in front of the sun, the gold won't crystallize. Well, if it's just gravity, then nothing's going to crystallize, right? Then the other metals wouldn't either, but you find that the other metals will become dominant. And if you do like lead and iron with or lead and tin with sort of like Jupiter-Saturn alignments, you find interesting relationships, whether they're in opposition or conjunction. And in that sense, again, here you're dealing with the Earth as the center of the actual interactions of the metals and the plants. So, yeah, I mean, you can argue about whether or not the plane's going to go this way or that way because of various scientific theories, but how do you explain, this plant and metal activity in the planets in light of sort of a relativistic, scientific, belief system? So, Caleb, what's your answer for that one?
Oh, man.
Quiz.
I love what you just said. It all just is starting to fit. It's all the little puzzle pieces for me are starting to fit together. The Kabbalah, alchemy, hermetics, all of the, all the different lore, the Vedas, all the different things I'm studying are just a completely new light now. And yeah, with the alchemy side of it, there's so many correlations, not just the structure, but I'm starting to figure out it's with just about everything. There's always a correlation to, they say the as above, so below. There's always a correlation to body, different alchemy in the body, different anatomy, different different geomantic sites. I don't know if you've seen all the Karl Monk stuff and Bruce Cathy's work. All these correlations are starting to fit together, and it's mind blowing. As far as like the metals and all the different correlations to the planets. I'm studying a lot of astrotheology right now, and it's fitting right in with that as well. All the planets, the days of the week, I
don't know if you guys have I'm sure you have, like, different planets govern different organs in the human body, like how central the human body is to all this. Even different constellations also govern different organs in the human body. And when you, like, I've been studying a lot of astrotheology now too. I just read the Gospel of Barnabas and the Gospel of the Book of Enoch. I'm sorry, the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. Listen to the whole thing, the audiobook, and it's pretty amazing what they get into. I mean, there's the different prophets supposedly in each of the 7 heavens, right? And each of the 7 heavens have their own planet. And each of those planets have their own metal. And each of those metals govern a different organ of the body. And I put together a little graph linking everything together. And I was just looking at it and just, it's absolutely astonishing. I mean, how do you make sense of all this? Like, what do you guys do to just try to connect all these dots.
Uh,
Tom, what do you think?
who said we're making sense of it? We're just connecting dots, looking for sense. Um, for me, it's about orientation, right? There's this massive data flowing by. So, yeah, just trying to understand that. I'd be fascinated to see that little correlative chart that you put together on that, because that's what I do. Is I go through books and basically make charts of the information. That's why I was able to sort of cross-correlate different archetypal structures from Eastern and Western systems by doing exactly that. That is probably one of the best practices. So, yeah, love to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then we get to, I mean, there's like Scott Onstott's work, The Secrets in Plain Sight.
Yeah, amazing.
And also there's a guy on who we've become friends with on Facebook, Joe Dubs, and his Cosmic Creations. And I mean, this all goes back to like John Michel's work, showing like the squared circle being the relationship between the Earth and the Moon and their whole geometry. And you're thinking, wait a minute, this stuff's not random. It's like the whole thing. It was almost like it was constructed by some super intelligence.
Oh,
It's powerful.
Oh yeah, and the architect that's inverting the natural order, that's also constructed by an intelligence.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
That has to exist intergenerationally. He's been around for a while, and I think understanding the identity of that architect of the Matrix, quote unquote, that's extremely important as well. That's a whole other chat.
Oh, exactly. But I wonder on that, and that's why I like John Lash's work. With the Sophia, as he says it, sort of Gnostic, mythology or story, and that this whole sort of archonic sort of structure that was created, and that I have to defer to John's sort of explanations of these. I just heard a wonderful discussion of them last week. This woman, Lisa Harrison, you can probably find on a search. She just did a two-part interview with John last week, earlier this week, which he tries to explain a bit of this. Because there definitely is a matrix structure here, trying to hold us back. And, that's why we look at things sort of like, it's funny because you talk to people about 9/11 stuff and point out how obvious it is. I mean, how the buildings just like turned to powder and all the flaws in the story. And they go, oh yeah, well, you probably don't believe they went to the moon either. And, the thing is the lies are so big that it's almost like almost everything that people believe and know about has been constructed, which in a sense, and that's why I was talking at the beginning, about the different rabbit holes. You have to be careful which rabbit hole you go down, because I've seen this. I can't remember the guy's name. The guy claims it was all false history, and it was like all those 1,000 years or more like missing, and everything's compressed, and like. I started going through some of that, but it just didn't sort of cross-correlate with other data. As fascinating it is to look at it, but then people get into that, and they'll be only into that. That's why I think it's important to go down all the rabbit holes you can that actually look like they've got objectifiable, verifiable sort of data, at least in part. And it's sort of like mining. You got to chip away and refine like the nuggets of good stuff that you find. You take it back and refine it in the crucible and see how it fits with other ideas, rather than just totally sort of believing these alternate views. And Tech, you might remember there was that one guy, the Revolution in Astronomy,
Yeah.
who passed away a few years ago, said that there's not all these galaxies, that they're actually like just star systems, and he made a lot of really good points. I never totally was sold on his thesis, but yet when I read it, I found it consistent, and I still wonder whether these galaxies are really galaxies, because then you start hearing about all these sort of rogue wandering planets and things, which they don't really highlight too much. And I'm wondering, how do they know about them? There a few things came out over the years about all these. There might be more planets wandering without stars than there are. But you don't really. And probably just a simple internet search will turn that stuff up. So what about all those? So there's so many ideas out there. And I think that's one of the good things about Etherforce, as we move forward, is we have a forum where these ideas can be discussed and brought together, And because there are good forums, there's like the Electric Universe forums, the Thunderbolts, and they're brilliant.
Yeah,
And I
they
really love
are.
reading them. It's hard to keep up on them all. They're following their specific paradigm on things, and but I think that we need to be even a bit more wide-ranging because you're not going to find much discussion of the geocosmos there on their forums.
Yeah, or the archons.
I posted it.
So I want to get really kooky with you guys for a second, like super kooky, right? Let's get crazy. So Tesla wrote an article about the moon, and he basically debunked the fact that the moon was rotating on its axis. He said that's impossible, and he outlined this experiment with washers that you could actually do and move it around a central object that would show that it's impossible that the moon is rotating on its axis. And you do the experiment, you see it is impossible. And then furthermore, I mean, to get really kooky about it, we can look at the moon. We can see it every night, right? We can look up and actually look at it. We can't do that with Jupiter, Saturn, or Mars. I mean, we can sometimes see them, but they're very small. But with the moon, we can see it. And as an artist, I know because I draw spheres, right? And like the spheres that we see every day is like the human eyeball, right? And it's always got, every sphere will always have the light very centered in a central spot with a little shading 3/4 of the way down. I look at the moon and it doesn't do that. It's evenly lit everywhere, you know? So at that point, I'm like, wait a minute. And I know I see the same side of it every day. So to me, as an artist, if I'm looking at that without any previous conceptions, I would say, yeah, that's some kind of flat, self-illuminated projection of some kind. Like right off the bat, I would say that. What do you guys think of that nuttiness right there?
Well, I don't know. I've been looking into the moon quite a bit as well, and at first, for a long time there, I believed that. Have you seen W.C. Wright's push gravity models?
Oh, yeah. I
Study.
met Walter Wright back in the 80s. He came by and visited me in California, showed me some experiments.
Yeah,
Fascinating work.
yeah. So he actually makes model. He's got. I think he said he had over 100 models, um, where he took magnets and he put them on sticks. He suspended them from strings, and his theory was that um, the moon has the most magnetic uh, properties on the face of it, and that it's actually magnetically locked with us. But he also didn't go down any of the rabbit holes with the Earth. He assumed that the Earth was spinning, so I think a lot of his models were flawed. But he makes a lot more sense of gravity itself, and uh, asks some really good questions about the moon. Like, um, I don't know if you've seen Tom, if you've seen his model where he actually has balloons, um, where if you squeeze a balloon, it bulges out on the sides, and he likened that to the way that the Earth, um, the tides, we have two tides on opposite sides of the Earth. We don't just have one. So it becomes pretty obvious since we have two tides, and there's no explanation with the relativity and the Newton theorists out there can't figure out why we only have one or we have two tides instead of just one if the moon was causing the tides. Um, in the push gravity model, it makes a lot more sense. Um, but there's a lot of things that I take from that and kind of mesh in with, like what you were talking about with Tesla and showing that the, the Earth, if the Earth isn't moving, the implications of us only seeing one side of the moon all the time, um, it would either have to be fixated and flat, or I almost like to think of it as the cornea of an eye,
Exactly.
or like
Exactly.
a lens, like a contact
Exactly.
lens.
Exactly. As above, so below. That's the only model to me that makes sense that we're in a concave Earth and there's something above us that's spinning like an eye, and
The
the moon and
celestial.
the sun are just like the lens. I'm sorry to cut you off. Please keep
Oh,
going.
no worries, no worries. Yeah, no, yeah. When I found that model of how the celestial sphere has the sun and the moon in a not as true spheres but as lenses,
Exactly.
and the way that light bends and refracts fits beautifully into the Russellian science. And it also, see, a lot of people have fought me on that, but the deeper I look into that, the way that concave and convex lenses work
Exactly. Yeah.
themselves, it makes so much sense the way that light bends when you figure out that light bends in a phi spiral, uh, and that you know the lenses are equal to me. The way that I've been looking at all the Freemason drawings and all their checkerboards, and I've been looking at stuff like Frank Chester's work and all these different people that theorize that it might be possible that the sun and the moon are equal size and
Yeah.
possibly equal distances.
They're they're definitely equal. So I mean, yeah. Yeah, I
And
agree with that.
all the math, I've been doing the math. I really don't like math, but I, I've been motoring through the math, and it's all starting to support the concave theory, and it makes way more sense when you instead of taking you take the academic distances to the moon, the planet, the suns, and the diameters and the radiuses, and you start to use harmonic intervals like the Pythagorean music of the spheres. Uh, you start to, it's a beautiful pattern that emerges with Les Brown's. I don't, you know who Les Brown is. He's got some amazing work with dropping water into, or I mean, dropping stones into water and measuring the concentric rings. And when you measure the concentric rings, you get. I think he said he uses cube root of pi, and pi just keeps coming up more and more and more, and phi.
If
And
I
so phi spirals, um, and in measuring the geometries, uh, I'm beginning to map out this concave, uh, the concave distances, and they're all starting to make this beautiful. Like if you take pictures of Stonehenge, or Temple Mound, or all the different places, and you put a diagram of the inner Earth and the celestial sphere and all the geometry, it lays out perfectly.
that's amazing. So on that note, Tom, we're seeking here. Where do you think we're actually trying to put the model together? Like we're not. We love to seek, but we actually want to put a model together. We actually want to know how it's constructed. What avenues do you think we should go down? Should we pursue just raw optics? Should we? How far do you think we should take the Russellian part of it? I mean, how much do you think we should factor in the whole geodesic information? Like, give us some guidance, man. You're the man on this. I know it's a hard question.
Yeah, well, I'd say I don't hold strictly to one model. I'm quite interested in that, and like Caleb was saying, the whole thing with the lensing, and I have no problem conceiving of that universe, but that's not the only one that I keep in my conceptions. So I'm still, in fact, I haven't totally worked that model out. The model uh, I like the most is the what I call the anthropocentric model, which is that we're on the outside of it, so that the thing is, and this is why I like the four world theory. So I try to fit all of them together because it's sort of like, even though I find a lot of fault and flaws with the concepts of quantum mechanics, and even the old double slit experiment, which I think is a miscomprehension of things.
Oh yeah.
But there is that fundamental underlying thing, which I believe is almost intuitive, that our observation of things has an effect upon them. They've found that in the laboratory in a number of situations. So I think it's, and this would even tie in with sort of John Lash's Gnostic work. That's part of, we're part of the dreaming of the Sophia in order as part of the, ongoing creation. So our conceptualizations of these models are part of the creation and unfolding of the models. So in that sense, I don't think we can come up with a single physical model. Although I find the concave one most fascinating just because there is the physical experimentation, which does it. But as I say, that's what I would call, that would be the generative world, from the Kabbalah, where you have the archetypal, the generative, the formative, and the manifest. So the manifest is sort of like third rock from the sun sort of concept, and that may actually be working out there, and we might actually be moving through space. We may not be. I think you have to keep your mind open to both of them because we don't actually know. So you have to keep your judgment suspended and allow for both possibilities as you investigate these different views. So in the sort of conceptualization that I work with, right, so there is that sort of model out there that science admits to or conceives of and believes in, rather than admits to. I think that was the wrong way to put it. But even within that model, we find these fascinating sort of things like the alchemical squared circle relationship between the Earth and the Moon, and the Moon and the Sun being the same size in the sky, and their relationship to gold and silver and chemical reactions. So even just in that one alone, it's fascinating. But those higher order things lead us then towards what I call the anthropocentric world, which is the formative world, and that's I showed in the cosmological botany. You have the way that it forms the actual structures of plants, these complex motions. Now that would still work naturally in the geocosmos on the inside. So what we find is, and this is where I still haven't totally worked out. I mean, I understand the Russellian sort of concept of the cube of space and all that, and that even ties into some of the interpretations of the Kabbalah, like in Carlos Suarez's work. I don't know if you've come across his work. I like of the various Sefer Yetzirah I read. I really liked his. He also wrote Cipher of Genesis and the Passion Play, and people came out with like the Bible Code. They go, Bible Code. I go, man, that stuff's like nonsense. They go, how do you know? I said, well, because they named like the conspirators of the 9/11 stuff, and that was obviously all made up. So why is the Bible going to the Word of God is going to imprint hoaxes in the past? But there really is a Bible Code. Which is Carlos Suarez showed in the Cipher of Genesis, which is absolutely brilliant. But in his Sefer Yetzirah, he shows the cube of space, and of course that comes in on other dynamic models as well. So that's certainly there as an orientation, but that's more of a subjective orientation. The objective orientation is more along the lines of projective geometry. And this is where I haven't totally been able, in my mind, so I still have a lot of work in meditation, I still got a couple more decades to go, is the relationship between Steiner's sort of projective geometric model and the Russellian model. Because I find that the projective geometric model more conforms to my conceptualizations and understanding of the way things work. Because reality is not 3D. Steiner said that the three dimensions of sort of the modern conceptualization, he said moving those three dimensions from the subjective to the objective was one of the gravest errors of mankind's descent into matter. Because where's the three dimensions out here in objective reality? We say, well, people say height, width, depth. You're just imposing that as a coordinate system for interpretation. They're not absolute. Within the nature of things, you pick up a rock. Sure, you can say, well, that's three dimensions, and you can use trigonometry to sort of map the surface. But those three dimensions are not inherent within the rock itself. It's just a rock. It takes up space, and so that's where the projective geometry comes in. And as Steiner said in projective geometry, he said once you understand that a line going off infinitely to the right returns from the left, he said once he understood that, he finally felt like he was like centered in the universe. And that's why I said, well, relativity is sort of like a spiritless sort of mirror of that, because relativity, in essence, is saying kind of the same thing, with their whole curved space stuff. Even though I don't know if we'll get that far into that. I have to be careful where I go with these discussions, because they can go off on about 5 different tangents. But you're asking about the model. So in that sense, yeah, the model is all of the models together, and then that which interpenetrates the different models, the archetypal structures, that's the model that you work from, because then when you're in these different models, you can find the bits that interrelate and are true within them. And that's why I always push back to that which relates to that which is living. The living nature of things, the sacred geometric structure of things, that which contains the sacred geometry, that which contains the living forms. That's why when you look at some of the work that was done on Tesla's modern stuff, you see the living electricity, the shapes. The closer you get to the dielectric forms of electric propagation, the closer you get to the relating to the structures of living forms. So, am I rambling on? You let me know here.
No, it's great stuff. I mean, so me and Caleb, we're like the young guys here, and we're not as mature and as disciplined as you are. We just want to know exactly what the fuck this thing looks like. Like that, we really want to figure that out. I know I do. I can tell Caleb does too. We're kind of like, we want to build an actual model of it and put it in a room and show everyone, hey, see that? That's actually the way things are. And it should be moving around and be really cool. And we want to do that. We really want to do it. We believe it's possible. Call us crazy, and maybe we'll. But
no, there is actually. In fact, I've shown pictures on a couple of things. I think we maybe even shown them in one of our hangouts. And that is this guy. You show it close up, it looks like a picture of the globe. But then you zoom out, and it's basically a concave sphere. You can't
that's
really.
Rolf Kepler's website. He's supposedly related to Kepler, the Kepler himself, I'll try to find it.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. So I think it's good to build all these models. All these models are important. The point I was trying to make is don't believe any of them as absolute. Keep a suspended judgment. It was because I was reading through all these theories that really opened my mind up. And that was one thing at Borderlands, is I had to deal with all these different people with different worldviews. And you're looking at Tesla's work and the way that he sort of developed electricity or electric propagation and his understanding of it. Even though he quoted Goethe and stuff, I never really found any relationship in his actual work or references to Goethe's theory of color. Though I find that I think Tesla's work is eminently explainable by understanding Goethe's theory. But then you look at Farnsworth, right, the master of the electron and the electron guns and stuff, with the TV dissector tubes. Different worldview. Thomas More, he was different, and you start dealing with all these different ideas. And of course, I was also reading Koresh and Walter Vanderkamp, the Tychonian Society. You youngsters got to remember, this is long before the internet. These are all like books and newsletters, fanzines, and things, is the way that these ideas would get around. And one of the seminal books in sort of opening my mind up to the multiple sort of things was Walter Vanderkamp's book, De Labore Solis, or Airy's Failure Reconsidered. That was on the experiments of George Airy, whether to prove whether the Earth was going around the Sun or the Sun was going around the Earth. And he was the royal astronomer that reproduced the experiment where, Bradley did some of those where they try to say, well, the aberration was caused by the motion, but
are those
in essence,
the interferometry experiments, the Airy experiments, Was that?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, there you got that picture up. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Aries, the interferometer experiments, and that's one of the things on my list to go back through and review again, just to really get my head back around them. And there was,
I have a question about all those interferometry experiments, and this is something that's really been like needling my brain, but I need your perspective on this. So I have a crazy theory about all that. At least the reason the interferometry experiments were just bouncing light off mirrors and measuring their speed, right? Trying to discover the existence of an ether that was moving, right? Was it's moving with the Earth through space, but they discovered that the ether was actually not moving, right? So if the ether was real, it would mean that it was not moving, meaning the Earth was moving, meaning if that the ether exists, then the Earth is not moving. Is that the reason why the ether had to, one of the reasons why the ether had to be so suppressed, because it would expose the lie of a moving Earth, perhaps?
um, well, I don't know, it was suppressed. It might have just been the general degeneration of consciousness. Um, because when the experiment was first considered, the aberration experiments, after the Copernican, because there was a difference between sort of the Tycho Brahe and Copernican models. Somebody, I believe it was a Jesuit priest named Boscovich, he proposed this thing where you basically sight a star through a telescope, and then you fill the telescope with water and look at the angle change, and then 6 months later you do the same and measure the difference of the angles. Well, nobody did that experiment for 100 years until Airy did it. It was when he was the royal astronomer, and they found no aberration, no change of the angle. So what they basically that led on to was all these experiments like Bradley's and Fitzhugh and Fresnel. What they were trying to do was they were trying to measure the ether. Now, it took me a while to really get my head around this, and the reasoning behind it is because here's the thing. Okay, so you got the sun in the middle, and the Earth is supposedly going around it. So here it is over on one side. They take a measurement of a star, with and without the water, and get the angle, and then 6 months later it's over here. Right, you're going to have basically an angle change between the two sides. But there's no angle change. So in effect, what they're saying is when the Earth is moving around, it's dragging the ether with it, so that the light's actually following it, which again doesn't really make sense when you think about the ether much as extend out of ways to do it. And of course, if you get into longitudinal theory of light, that throws that whole reasoning out anyway. But nonetheless, what they were thinking is they were trying to do these experiments. So when they were doing these things with the interferometers and the lights, they were doing them at different directions, like east, west, north, south. Or like Fresnel, I believe it was, he was doing them, might have been Fitzhugh, I can't remember, was doing them through like U-shaped tubes where they would split the light beam up, run through diffraction gratings, they'd have the water moving in two different directions. They were trying to see if the water would pull the ether. What they were looking for was proof that matter would pull the ether, so it could explain away the fact that the results of various experiments made it appear that the Earth was not moving, and that was basically it. So they were trying to explain that away because, as Walter Vanderkamp said, by the time Airy did the experiment, people had already accepted the Copernican view in their mind, even though they never experienced it. It was just an imagination construct from which the sort of modern scientific paradigm was built. So in essence, and even then Oliver Lodge, he did the experiment. He would do these big granite turntables on sort of springs or on mercury. Of course, they were doing them down in basements of buildings, because of the weight of the things. Big granite turntable and mercury. You can't put it on the top floor of a wooden building. So they were basically, and then these things would just be like, fractions of an inch above the light beams, and they were basically hoping that the moving granite would pull or affect the light rays. And apparently they did get experiments, and they had to consider what they thought were errors, and they Michelson-Morley experiments, which were similar, and came off of them. But I believe it was Jim DeMeo. He put out not Mickelson, but one of the other experimenters that worked with them, and he eventually started doing some experiments up in higher grounds. I think up in like Wilson Observatory there in L.A. And they found it working in some measurements. And then, of course, Wilhelm Reich's work showed that the ether was a much more complex thing, sort of moving with the Earth, or, of course, as he saw it, moving from west to east, helping the Earth move. And Trevor Constable sort of incorporated that thesis into his weather engineering experiments. And, so there seemed to be some validity, at least in those flows, as far as creating changes in weather systems by inserting sacred geometric objects into the flows at certain velocities and directions at certain times. So yeah, anyway, that's obviously the ether was suppressed, maybe not so much to so people didn't understand the nature of the structure of the planetary system or our place in the universe, but I think that was more just so that people didn't understand that probably there's unlimited energy everywhere that can be drawn off once they understand. So because the ether is living, as Reich showed, anything that's alive is basically suppressed. I think that's the core structural armoring, which, as he said, leads towards the fascist sort of characterological structure as found in Nazi Germany or sort of modern day U.S. The rigid authoritarian, life-crushing sort of thing. You can't have the ether in that sort of structure.
Yeah, I mean, the ether. Another big thing is that it connects us all. It's something that would honestly, logically explain how an energy like God could exist, right? Because the concept of God as some old man up in the sky that thinks you're a jerk, it's completely illogical. Any rational person is going to laugh at that, But if you explain it as a kind of ever-present, omnipresent mind force, like something like the ether would make omnipotence or being omnipresence logical. You'd understand how a being, a creator, could use a tool like that if he wasn't that himself. You know what I mean? So I think if Satan wanted to suppress something, if he wanted to destroy the idea of God, destroying the idea of the ether would be a first step in making it an illogical, just absurdity. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, hey, Caleb, give you a chance. I've been yakking away here. What do you think?
Yeah,
Don't sugarcoat now, Caleb. Give it to us, bro. I know you got something you want to get out there. I feel it.
All right. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, when I'm thinking of the ether, there's so many names for it. Energy, prana. There's probably 50 names I can think of for it right off the top. But my personal perspective of it has more to do with an all-encompassing mind. Like you could say consciousness itself could be likened to the ether. Obviously the brain doesn't contain consciousness itself, and the brain is kind of a receiver for it. And a lot of the Hermetic teachings will tell you that the all is mind. And I really like Walter Russell's explanation. It's just it's so eloquent the way he puts it.
Universal one, yeah.
Yeah, the universal one. We live in. He calls it the cosmic light cinema, and likens light itself to the way that I view it is like little tiny light bulbs, or almost like a television screen with a whole bunch of pixels. So not that light itself is moving, but that it's a whole bunch of little light bulbs flashing in sequence, and there's a governing force and an algorithm to everything. That's why the matrix theories make so much sense. But as far as like God sitting, or some supreme being dictating, our universe. I think it's pretty. I think it's pretty obvious that we live in an electric universe. Those Thunderbolt guys are doing a great job of showing that stuff,
Yeah.
and all of my deepest insights come from studying electrical engineering and crystals, electric bodies, everything electric. Because there's, as Walter Russell puts it, there's an equal and opposite, um, male and female. There's a balanced interchange, the rhythmic balanced interchange between you know everything. And I start to think, if there really has to be an equal and opposite to everything, then there has to be um, a good and an evil. There has to be, for every hero, for every Tesla, for every Russell, for every Tom Brown, we have an Einstein, or we have a shill that is just there to
So
be the villain. A villain. There has to be for every hero there's a villain, and there's always an equal balance to things. So it
so
kind of makes a bigger
this
picture emerge.
this is like a central thing, right? I mean, like in nature, it's full of polarities and opposites, right? Yin and yang. What I've seen is that that applies to everything except the one. The G word, God. Like God is one. Like that's the only thing where there is no opposite. Like the Force. Like, if you really think of what the Force actually is, there should be no dark side or good side. The Force is the Force. The moment you split it into two, it's not the Force anymore. It's something else. And then you split into two, then they try to split it into three, a trinity, and then it gets even worse. Like, oh yeah, the Force is in each one of us. So now there's 7 billion of us. It's like, it's almost as if this nemesis, this all-encompassing architect of the Matrix, he's working so hard to destroy that central concept that God is one. Like, that's his thing. It's like, when I read Universal One, it made so much sense to me. Honestly, Universal One to me was just Islamic. Like, the whole thing about that, it's not a new religion. It's just saying that God is one. And every prophet, it says, every prophet came with a message: God is one. God is one. Whatever you want to call God is one. And it seems everything that's come after that has been trying to get us away from the fact that God is one. First two, then three, then whatever. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, well, I think it makes sense. Thing is, you have to consider what the number one is. It's not like a singular unit. That's just the modern discursive approach. One, as a number, which I sort of dealt with a bit in my quaternity video. One is the number. If you multiply anything by one, it remains the same, right? It's a universal principle. So you start looking at it in a larger sort of sense, like in quaternity mathematics, we could call it. I'm not really a believer in, sort of the external, sort of personal Godhead looking over everybody, like, a shepherd on his flock or something. I think that there are sort of like group souls of animals and things like that. But I think that we ourselves are. In fact, I was going to bring this point up earlier, talking about as above, so below. And I see people use that. I've seen it in a couple of talks here and there over the years. People say, well, look at a galaxy and look at a whirlpool. Well, that's actually not the as above, so below, because if they start measuring the stars in the galaxy, I found out they're all moving away from the galactic center instead of towards it, which kind of I've actually shown that in some of my lectures, the scientific stuff on that. So it's not the same as a whirlpool. It just looks like that. The as above, so below, the true Hermetic sort of approach to that is that which is outside, it's a subjective objective. That's we do get the as above, so below, like as we could see the mirroring of the heavens into the buildings through like archaeoastronomy and things. There's obviously that function. But then there's also the primary function for ourselves, which is the subjective objective, that which again then we get into like sort of, I think it was you Tech mentioned earlier, the relationship between the constellations and the planets with bodily structure and things. This is to me, all of that together is what one could conceive of as a God, I suppose. There's obviously divine creative force, which drives life. But of course, even in life, you don't have a thing. Farmer knows you got to run the compost pile to get the nutrients for the next round of growing. So there is that interaction of like growth and decay. They're intertwined. I think where things like what we say evil would sort of arise is where the general flow or the general cycle between positive and negative is interrupted. So, darkness isn't evil because you need sleep. In fact, plants grow at night. They sort of absorb energy during the day and then grow at night. So, we need these natural cycles. So, like I say, there's no to me, external sort of personal God looking over me. I'm responsible for myself. So, and John Lash, actually, who I mentioned earlier, he wrote this great book, Quest for the Zodiac. He was a tropical astrologer for 30 years, and he was over at Madras, I think, in India, at the Theosophical Center there. So he also looked into sidereal astrology, but he's saying it's even beyond that. It's like the true positions of the stars. So he came up with this whole thing about Earth's sort of scope. So he actually includes Earth into the whole sort of diagram. He says it's not about how the universe, gives us an individuality. It's more about how we are each our own individual representative of humanity. Humanity lives through us. So we are the ones. We are the expression of the divine. Whether or not we manifest that in our actions, that remains to be seen on how each of us goes. But I suppose in a nutshell, that's probably my explanation. If somebody's asked me what I thought of, is there a God or something?
That's a great one. That's pretty it's pretty Tom Brownish, right? Hey, Caleb, what do you think, man? This is a hard question. What do you feel this entity is? I mean, tough question, I know.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, you really like to skip to the tough ones.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that it's really hard ultimately to find any separation from anything as far as that is objective. The more I look at anything, the more I find connections. And when I deeply meditate and be still and be in the moment and quiet the mind, I feel connected. And I've had experiences on psychedelics and theogens that kind of take you out of this body, and all of a sudden you kind of realize that you're part of something greater. And kind of one of my theories is that for every single living thing has two parts of its consciousness. It's like a scalar theory. So consciousness itself is scalar. So say you have a whole bunch of little cells inside of your body. Okay, let's talk about the body. You have all these little tiny cells that think of themselves as I, the cell, and they think of themselves as something greater. They also know that they're a part of a whole body, or part of something larger and larger and larger. So if you take cells, they know of themselves as I, the cell, and they also know themselves as we, the tissue that all the cells comprise. And each of the tissues know themselves as we, the tissue of the organ, but they also know themselves as we, the organ, and then the organs know themselves as I, the organ. They also know themselves as we, the organ system of the body, and so on and so forth. And that goes larger and larger till you reach humans are supposed to know themselves as I, the human, and supposed to know as we, the, like the Earth has all of its components, right? And
So
then the Earth may have a certain consciousness that knows itself as something larger and so on and so forth. And I think the more you zoom in, the more you see unity, and you see it like Tom was saying, the as above, so below. And
it's very
there's just
fractal, the
yeah,
fractal
like
theory.
you can't really remove um, any of the parts to the whole. They all have a function. Every single thing has a function. We're sitting here. Sometimes we think to ourselves, "Man, I wish everybody knew, relativity was bunk." But if you ultimately think about it, there's this huge cosmic drama being played out here. And a lot of philosophers like Alan Watts, um, and a lot of the Zen Buddhists, they kind of talk a little bit about how the purpose of the duality and the equal and opposites, like in our reality, is kind of so that this one supreme being, who is us, observing itself through different points of view, all interacting in these dramas that are, sometimes they're horrific, and sometimes they're, people struggling and suffering, but at the same time, there's an equal and opposite swing of the pendulum over to the amazing feelings of love and compassion and all the beautiful things that we experience. And it's almost, it's almost like a big giant cosmic play that's being played out.
Cosmic light cinema, right?
Yeah, and that's why I really like Russell's
Yeah.
interpretation of all that. But as far as Russell's interpretations go, with God itself being completely outside of this, this duality, being at
Yeah.
the center, at the fulcrum.
Yeah.
I think that's very important, but I don't know if I like all the different aspects of, a lot of people get trapped in the dogma of saying, this terminology and this ideology from Walter
Yeah.
Russell is the only way, and that you
Absolutely.
can't go.
Yeah, yeah. We yeah, we've been there. We don't want to.
Yeah,
We're not religious fanatics here.
yeah,
Everything
but
from everywhere, right? And
yeah,
some people
exactly.
are, and that's cool. But all right, so guilty confession by me, right? I I really focus a lot on the Abrahamic traditions for the simple reason that beyond the shadow of a doubt, they're the most corrupted, right? Like, can we all admit to that? Like, you look at
Yeah.
the Abrahamic traditions and we see someone is taking a lot of trouble to really corrupt everything from the Abrahamic tradition to the point of complete and utter ludicrousness, right? Like, I think we can agree to that. And when I see that, knowing what I know about the pattern of this entity that's trying to corrupt everything, I'm like, there must be something here if he's working so hard to corrupt us, to corrupt this particular strain, right? So I studied history and Eastern religions in college, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, all that stuff, and it's been corrupted as well, of course, but nowhere near as much as the Abrahamic tradition. So for that reason, I really like to study the Abrahamic tradition and some really desperate. When you study like these Abrahamic Semitic texts, you feel like a caveman, a blind caveman flinging poop in a dark cave, trying to piece together a manuscript in a language that you don't know and you don't even know how to read. Period. So it's a hell of a challenge. But I feel like there's really something there with someone who's working so hard to hide that. Tom, what do you think about that craziness right there, that worldview?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, let's go back to like I mentioned Carlos Suarez, his book, The Cipher of Genesis, which I read when I was a teenager, and I've recently reacquired, and I'm hoping to go through it again. He talks about, I think, was in there I saw it where the beginning of the Bible in Hebrew, Barashith Bara Elohim. In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. But Elohim, he points out, is feminine plural. So,
Yeah,
which does make you think. And that's kind of, well, wait a second, man. The whole thing starts out with a feminine plurality, which kind of fits in my view of the electric universe. Rather than being Big Bang, there was sort of a dual field that's sort of connected. And then that gets into kind of what Caleb, you were saying about with the Russell thing about the God is at the balance or outside, which you could think of as sort of the supernals sort of forming, in the Kabbalah out of Kether down to Hakman and Bina. But then also I find that would relate to, in sort of the final stages of sort of the 9 stages of the Tantric Buddhism and the old Nyingma, where basically working the mandala, you're working the subjective-objective interface, and really the stages of enlightenment, or what they call Dzogchen, that is when you are able to sort of basically be aware of both the subjective and objective at the same time. That's the point with where you rise up to the higher levels, supposedly. I've been trying to figure it out. I'm not saying I'm there, but I've certainly dragged my mind through a few of those books trying to get my head around what they're actually talking about with it. So I think there is a sort of cross-correlation through all these different philosophies. There's never going to be like one true philosophy, or maybe there will be, but the way that people argue about it, you can always find flaws. So I think it's it's good that we keep our mind open to all these different ideas as we go through them. Never be dogmatic about anything except that which is just so obvious that you can't deny it. Which I'm not even sure about it. What that might even be at this point.
Well, I'm going to throw something out here because, okay, this is quite a statement I'm about to make, but I want to throw this out to both you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about anything except for one thing. Only one thing, and it's 3 little words. And I know this in my heart. This is the absolute truth, and it's somehow these 3 little words will lead us to something. Will lead us to the real enlightenment understanding. God is one. God is one. Do you guys see anything in that could possibly lead us to something amazing? I don't know. Tossing it out there. Caleb, what do you think?
Well, I really resonate with that a lot. I definitely feel that there's a oneness, like a connect. I feel connected to everything, like I was saying before. But I like to think about the word God as an acronym for generation, operation, and dissolution. I think I got that from Santos Bonacci. But yeah, generation, operation, and dissolution. So, the generative principle, the operation of things, and then the dissolution. Just like Russellian science talks about the rhythmic balanced interchange between the 2 and the 1, And, I think, I don't know if you guys have looked into John Depew, but that he's really been on my mind a lot lately. And his discoveries about, he talks about the 3 being the 1 and how important the 3 are in our reality. But ultimately, when you quiet the mind and you get rid of the duality in everything, as far as meditation, with understanding anything, you quiet the mind and you live in the moment, right? The whole Socrates, philosophy, and that's where it is. It's the 1. That's where all the answers really lie, is the 1, and the duality that comes out of that, is the whole eat not from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I think that's kind of a clue into the whole You know, it's the one. It's the illusion is the two, and this is the we're inside of this illusion. And we can pick apart, what God is. Uh, Ultimately, you only know when you become the one. Ultimately, right? When you get rid of the duality and you return to the one, near death experiences and psychedelic experiences. That's been on my mind a lot lately too. It's like
Absolutely. Tom, there's a quote in
Sorry,
Matter Matter.
I actually clicked on a window and started making noise. I hope you didn't hear that.
I did hear that. It was really ear shattering. I was hoping.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. I just, no, so I remember who John DePew was, so I clicked on his Coral Castle page. I remember then, what it was. That was what the noise was. Well, I think that, like you were saying earlier, Caleb, that we're all sort of like points of view within this oneness. Where it's almost like we're the highest sort of sensory nodes within that, and we can extend those senses even further, through, as Steiner said, developing new cognitive organs of perception. And that's why I like that book, Man or Matter, because what that shows in there is that everything pretty much is polarized. Anything that's manifest has a polarity, which once you understand that, then you realize the fallacy of the so-called electromagnetic spectrum, because there isn't just a straight line of vibration which causes things. You have dynamic spheres of activity, like heat, light, chemical activity, which we can relate to infrared, visible, and ultraviolet sort of ranges. But where's life in there? It doesn't really sort of exist on that line. I remember there was this great researcher, Larry Spring, with his electromagnetic spheres, who I understand is now a museum of his work up in Fort Bragg, California. And I published on him back in Borderlands, and he was basically showing how, in his comprehension, electromagnetic energy sort of flows in like circular things. And he had all these experiments with balls, and I still got 4 gigahertz ping pong ball, signed by Larry somewhere. It's one of my souvenirs. I remember he came and visited me in Northern California, and I was showing him some of the weather engineering tubes we were using for cloud creations, and the orgone accumulator you could sit in and feel the orgone moving in. It was built by Bob McCullough, Reich's assistant. It was one of the original ones, and Larry was fascinated by it. Very open-minded gent, and he goes, but where does this stuff fit on the electromagnetic spectrum? And I said, it doesn't. And he looked puzzled. He goes, I thought everything was on the electromagnetic spectrum. I go, nah. I go, you got to open your mind up a bit more than that. So in Man or Matter, it discusses everything as being polarized, and even gravity. So what's the polarity of gravity? Well, as he shows in that book, it's levity, and how the original sort of natural scientific conception started understanding levity, but then there was what we call like the contra levitatum sort of movement, which pushed it all out. Because, so you have gravity, but you also have levity, which is actually the thermosphere. And you can even, when you won't go too into detail in that right now, but then you can understand why if you go look at, flames on the space station, they basically occur in spheres, right? Because they're no longer rising up; they're already up in this sort of field of endeavor. But that's what Man or Matter really explains in detail, how everything that's manifests as a polarity. So really, to find that from which things do manifest, you have to transcend that polarity, which again, and my conceptualizations, returns me back to sort of like the Eastern religions of, which Zen would be the more simplified. That's why I sort of like the technical things like the Vajrayana, because they sort of try to deal specifically with overcoming the illusions of polarity within this sphere.
Absolutely. So, Tom, I have a question for you. So, when are you going to stop, trying to save the Maori tribes of New Zealand, and when are you going to give us your whole 4 worlds presentation? Because I've been waiting for that for a while.
Oh, no, I'd love to. Unfortunately, I've been or distracted. I always have what I call the demons in my mandala. Whenever I try, had the corrupt government officials hassle me for about 9 years here, so I've been somewhat pinned down and distracted. But hey, that's part of the learning experience. Doesn't really faze me that much, other than the distraction of it. So we're hoping to bring that all to a head soon, and get back on with doing videos. And like we discussed tech about possibly doing meeting up around the world and doing sort of TV shows in different places. And I believe that we'll see the unfolding of a lot of that in this next year. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I have been collecting a lot of data because we're talking about these four worlds, right? First we discussed the first three, right? The basic heliocentric model, then we have the geocentric model, or the anthropocentric model, more functionally, and then we have the concave Earth, right? The geocosmos, which is sort of like the whole cosmic egg, the generative model. But then, what's the archetypal model is the mandala, right? The flat plane, because in projective geometry, it doesn't matter if you're on the inside or the outside of the planet. It's a plane at infinity, and and therefore, the plane is the ultimate thing, and the plane with the four forces working on it is the mandala. So that is the archetypal structure, and then when you get into like the structure of the mandala, which I did in my Dorje blessing video, it came out about a year ago, I just really laid that down as the groundwork for the next phase, where I actually show how these worlds and the sectors of the mandala and the whole perceptual structure of everything fits together. And it was probably because I was on that trail that these sort of mandala demons popped up from the commissioner's office again. They just sort of they actually make stuff up and file nonsense. And we've actually shown in court through stuff that don't have any standing, but that doesn't stop the bullies, I think.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, They're always going to try to go for the white wizards. He's trying to save the world.
Oh, I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to experience it and just enjoy it. Like I say, the sensory organs always sort of went along with that. I certainly wasn't one that was into the ascetic path.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, too, Caleb spoke about being like points of view. So we're like sensory nodes, but then we get into like the psychedelics. And I always liked Shulgin's sort of approach to that, what he called the Ma Bell sort of thing, where like in the old phones, right now our phones are all digital and stuff, but once we got past the dial phones into the touch tone keypads, what we had the 12 buttons on there. He said, but if you went into like military or government offices in the States, which he had been in a lot of because of his research, they would have an extra 4 buttons on the side. So there's actually 16 buttons you could dial. So so you could dial into all the different secret places and obviously get more information or talk to different people. So he sort of likened the psychedelics or entheogenic molecules because they're based on normal neurotransmitters like dopamine or serotonin, and you just change the structure slightly, and you get different consciousness effects. So he was basically saying that using that model of the extra 4 buttons down the phone as being basically so the psychedelics are no more than higher order neurotransmitters that allow us to perceive actual functions of the universe in a different fashion, which is why they're so heavily suppressed. You look at sort of even like what the Spaniards did to the Indians who were doing peyote and stuff, just from the very beginning, the brutal repression of any change in consciousness except the stupefaction that comes from alcohol. Yeah. That's just a war on consciousness, just like the war on knowledge of the ether, war on any information that doesn't fit the dogmatic paradigm that keeps people stupid and enslaved.
Here we are now trying to break out of that. After how many thousands of years? Would you put it at? We're doing a good job though. This whole thing, with Etherforce being open source living science, I think if 4 words can capture what we really need to do, open source living science are the four words. And I'm really looking forward to more from you, Tom, on all of that. You know, more. Because I still remember your Victor Schauberger video that you made like what 30 years ago. That was, yeah,
early '90s.
that was the first thing yes, that was the first thing I ever saw, man, and that really like opened up my eyes. I still remember your mustache. How old were you in that video? How old were you in that video?
How old was I? About 38.
You were 38? No way. You look like you were 24 or something.
All right. Yeah.
You serious? 38?
No, I was like 29 when I took over Borderlands. Would that have been about, yeah. Yeah, it was about, basically 29 when I took over from Riley.
Wow.
So, you know, it's amazing that video. I mean, because I looked at that video at the time, I was always kind of embarrassed because it never came out the way I wanted. You know, and I used to freeze in front of the camera. For some reason or another, I was sort of deathly scared of. Whenever the camera, you know, I could like read lines or chat like we're chatting now, but as soon as the camera came on, you know, you look at those early like lab videos, I felt like I was frozen. I was like trying to remember what to say, losing my place in my consciousness just because the camera was on. So I look back at that stuff more out of embarrassment because I didn't think it, whereas everybody else is going, wow, man, those are like classics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your best time in front of the camera is to come, honestly. I think I would personally love to see Tom Brown going around the world and just sharing his findings with us. So on that note, guys, it's been almost 2 hours, or it's been over 2 hours, so I think we should call it quits. But, man, it's been awesome. And, Caleb, I got to say, brother, I want to see I want to pick and just mooch off all this amazing research you're doing. I gotta see that article, man. I'm like dreaming about that article that you're writing, and like I'm so psyched to see your research. Dude. You got no idea how geeked out I am about this. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about it too, but you know what my problem is I keep finding more to add into it. I keep cherry picking a little bit more over here. And it correlates so well. I'm like, I can't leave this out. No. And so it just keeps growing and growing. At one point, I'm just going to have to focus on one little part of the whole and, you know, publish just that is what I'm going to have to do. So, believe me, I'm working on it, you know.
It can be a multi-part series too, bro. You just give us something to keep us happy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, at this point, all I'm doing is sorting it out properly so that it's easier to understand. You know, picking out the most significant stuff to, you know, piece together a little bit by little bit, so just to get people thinking about stuff proper, you know.
All right. We're all waiting for that.
I'm working on it. I'm working hard on it. Sometimes I work, you know, sometimes my eyes hurt from staring at the computer so long. So you'll get it. You'll get it soon.
I know the feeling, Caleb, because I've got a lot of half-finished articles, a lot of like outlines, like complete lectures and stuff. That there's so much data in there that it's just so ongoing. And I look back at it and go, God, no, I could have done that. I could have done that. So the thing is I need to sign off here. I appreciate all you guys' time, and I know Jameson's been on the sort of chat on the side. Couldn't get on it. He's brilliant. Comes up with a lot of data. And we got you know, John Eck or Eckel. You know, I think it's just great that, you know, we've got you guys out here just looking at these ideas, sharing the data, just trying to figure it out. You know, I mean, I don't think I'm anything special in the thing of things. It's just I was sort of there first and did some stuff, and I'm happy to keep on having these discussions and sharing information and just seeing, you know, where we can all go with it. You know, we're all in this together. You know, none of us has a exclusive sort of hold on any particular strain of knowledge. You know, we've all got active minds, and we're just trying to, you know, understand and share information. And so, no, appreciate your time. So, like I say, I've got to sign off here. I've got people showing up, so I'm gonna have to take off. So, thank you guys, and we'll talk soon.
Tom, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you've been there ever since you started making those those Schauberger videos. All the new stuff that you had on Etherforce just was exactly what I needed to go to the next level. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, cool. No, thank you. Makes it worth doing when you actually hear that. I always said I only need to, if I just wake up one person along the way, I'll be happy. But hopefully it'll be me. But 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 no, I think it's great. Like yourself and John and Jameson, and it's just really greatly heartened. And I appreciate hearing that from you. And look forward to just kind of more of these discussions, more sharing information, and hearing your insights, because it's just great connecting. So
You've been working hard for a real long time, Tom, and in a scene full of like narcissists, psychopaths, and straight out like kooky lunatics, you are the real deal. You're the realest guy here. You're a leader, and you're more than just knowledge. You're a leader, and you've still got the biggest cojones. See,
Yeah.
which is more important than brains, in my opinion. And exactly. On that note, gentlemen, so thank you so much. See you guys next time. Peace. May the
hey,
fourth
great. Hey, Merry Christmas too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, happy solstice.
Happy solstice. Yeah. It's Christmas Eve here already, right, in the evening. So, all right, we're a day ahead. All right. Hey, you guys take care, man. Many blessings.